Hey there, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering. We are really glad you're here because you'll be listening to a conversation that will help you with a topic that doesn't get too much discussion in our business. So we sit down with Mark Borcher, who is part of our Razorleaf Government Solutions business, to unpack the challenges of retiring legacy business systems, from knowing when it's time to retire, to managing data, to training users and overcoming resistance. Mark shares some practical insights on making these transitions smoother. Let's jump in. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, the podcast about all things digital related to products, from engineering to manufacturing, service, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Julianne Grant, and I am joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hello, everybody.
Good day, Jonathan. Well, today we're talking about something that really doesn't get a lot of attention in our space, and that is what to do with old systems. Specifically, we want to talk about what you need to know when it comes time to retire an existing business system. So when do you do it? How do you do it? And why do you do it? So to do that, we've invited a special guest to join us today, Mark Borcher. Welcome, Mark, to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, it's great to have you, Mark. So let me tell you a little bit about Mark. Mark has been with Razorleaf since 2019, and he actually joined our Razorleaf Government Solutions division. And he focuses on the PLM architecture and business process re-engineering for government and defense programs. And before that, he spent 11 years at Atlas Copco, starting as an engineer drafter and growing into roles across aftermarket sales, redesigns, overhauls, and system engineering. So over his 17-plus year career, he's developed expertise that bridges hands-on engineering with enterprise transformation, spanning mechanical and electrical engineering, project management, manufacturing processes, and systems integration. And today he helps organizations modernize through PLM, ERP, CRM, and supply chain solutions, bringing both technical depth and strategic perspective to every project. And I'm sure you've retired a system or two there, Mark.
Just a couple.
Just a couple. Yeah, with that, I want to jump right in and set the stage for a few questions. Because, Mark, I know you've been doing this a while, and you, like you just said, you retired a few systems here and there. Like Julianne noted, though, this topic, it really doesn't get enough attention. And everyone's often focused on the shiny new thing. It's probably replacing a legacy system. But you've spent a lot of time helping people think about this and prepare for these kinds of transitions. So I know there's a lot more to system retirement than migrating data and turning off servers. And another important point I want to make before we jump in, just to set the stage for everybody, is that in this discussion and your experience, we're talking more broadly than just PLM, right? I mean, a lot of times on the podcast, you could think we're just talking in that sort of area. And I know you've worked with ERP and PLM transitions, as well as many, many point solution transitions. So I hope people are going to hear your insight and the things that you've observed and that you can share with them, and they'll see how that applies to whatever system transition they're thinking about, right? So with that, I want to get into some of the details, right? I mean, let's start with what Julianne was saying a minute ago. What are some of the things that trigger a decision to retire an existing business system like a PLM or ERP or any of these point systems?
So, yeah, there's a lot of different things to consider when looking at retiring an existing system. Several of those are related around functionality. Depending on how long your company's been around, you could have a company that was created back in, let's say, the 40s or 50s. If you've got an electronic system that was developed up at the front end, like I've seen several times, DOS-based systems, very basic programming systems, trying to operate, let's say, supply chain management, and you're looking at a DOS-based system, and you have some person come into your company and they're trying to figure out how to use DOS, which hasn't been used, in the better part of 30 years. So,
I think I started on DOS.
Yeah. So when you start looking into that, that's a big deal, is trying to get, customer adaptation. I guess I call it customer adaptation now. But at the time, trying to get people to adapt that are around you. So newer and better functionality is typically a big deal.
Well, and even newer technology, it sounds like you're talking about too there, right? With DOS, like even catching up with what's the current tech.
Yeah, and that's another problem you run into is that the the old systems, like DOS-based systems, they're running on their last limb. A lot of these programs are not able to be supported anymore by their base programming.
Right.
So a lot of people have come in and said, we're not supporting that system anymore. I ran into that a lot. JavaScript is all over the place because that keeps threatening retirement. So anything that's JavaScript based is all over the place, really, when it comes to retiring those systems. So a lot of times, having compliant systems that you're trying to utilize that are still supported. A lot of cases, especially with the government, you can't use a system that's no longer supported. So that's a big deal as well. That also drives when you need to do something typically, because they'll tell you this thing is not going to be supported in a year. And you got to try to figure out how to do something in a year to make that work.
I know I get that question. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but that one, I've in the government, that one's clear, right? Because it's almost sort of regulatory. Like you will not be on an unsupported system. In the commercial side, I've heard that question a lot out of people, and they're like, well, what's the big deal? I could keep using it even if it's out of support, that kind of thing. I think that's an interesting one to address. I mean, from your perspective, what do you see? What's the real driver behind it beyond you have to be supported? Is there something that's causing that, you think?
Yeah, I think that there's a big deal when it comes to running a program, a PLM or an ERP software, and you're trying to operate the program, you run into an issue. And it's like, okay, well, we have this consulting firm, they should be able to fix the issue. But if it's not being supported by the people that generated the software, it's a lot more difficult to try to dig into fixing those problems, because you can't find solutions to problems that are just popping up currently that are new problems. And then there's new programming technology that's being implemented maybe on the software that you are utilizing that you can no longer implement to the old software because it's not supported anymore. So there's a few different problems you bump into when you start looking into trying to use a system that's no longer supported. Can you do it? Yeah, sometimes you can do it, but you just got to be aware at some point it's just going to stop working. And there's not much people can do to assist you other than trying to get you into something more modern.
The other one I hear about there is security too, right? I hear that one come up a lot. Security when they're like, well, if it's not supported, that means people aren't going to address that issue. Even if you don't have the issue today, there's some security flaw that the vendor's not working to close. And then when a bad actor finds it, now you're really out of luck, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what somebody needs to plan for when it comes to moving or retiring a system and trying to get onto a new one. What are the things they need to be planning for retirement?
So you need to look at your overall systems, and you need to figure out what you want to retire. So that's going to be a big deal, is trying to determine what you want to retire, and then you have to determine which approach to retire it. So a lot of times, especially with the government that I'm running into, you got a lot of systems that are cross-functionality. So you have a system that involves things that use product lifecycle management, but then also has pieces of resource management in it, as well as shop management and supply management, all in the same program. This is great, but this is also forms several systems that do their own individual activities. So what you start running into is you have a ton of systems that all do a specific task. And that's an issue. So one of the things you got to look into is try to start matching the capabilities that you need moving forward into systems that you're moving to. So the way that I like to see a lot of these things is there's really 4 pillars. You have a PLM, which manages the product lifecycle. You have an ERP, which kind of manages your shop activities and how to manufacture components. You have a CRM, which manages your customers, your quoting, your sales proposals. And then you have a supply chain system that keeps track of all of your stock. With those 4 pillars, you can usually integrate just about anything into those 4 pillars, and they communicate ideally with each other. So you want to match the capabilities to one of those 4 systems, typically, especially if you're moving to all 4 of those different systems. a lot of these systems now have data limits. So we can retain your data for 5 years. Well, you need to look at what you're going to do about archiving data that's, let's say, older than 5 years. How are you going to still have access to that, especially if you need it? A lot of companies, 10-year-old data is not necessarily trash. You want to potentially look into that for quality purposes. If you run into a problem, maybe this machine has been around for 15 years and you need to know if it's a regular problem that happens. So you need to make sure you look into data archiving. You also need to make sure you're getting rid of useless data. So you have...
That's a big one, right? I mean, people are like, well, I'm just going to bring it all because I might need it. Data pack rats.
Yeah.
Big closet.
So another
how do you do that? I mean, is there a process that you go through with clients to do that?
Yeah. So I like to see if we can get data dumps of existing data, and then trying to determine, especially, the first project I worked on, we had something like 275,000 materials. And the company is primarily, a manufacturer of electronics and things made out of metal. There's not 275,000 of those. So the first thing we did was look into that data and try to figure out how to clean it. Because we really don't want to have, if you, what's the old adage, junk in is junk out. So you don't want to bring a bunch of junk in there that then you're going to have to dig through in a new system. So data cleanliness is a big deal. When you start looking at trying to retire a system. So that 275,000, for example, became less than 60,000 materials. And when you start considering certs and everything, it's a big, it's a lot, but it's also a big reduction from what it was.
Yeah, a big cleanup, but it seems like that really probably helped them moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it made the new system clean. And then when you start looking at a new system, you typically have metadata, which you didn't have before. So you just had one field with everything crammed into it. Well, now you got all these different fields that you can now separate the data and make it easier to search. So it all made everything a lot cleaner. Also, you got to look into user transition, trying to get users comfortable with what's coming. So you also want to ensure that you prepare users for what it's going to look like in the future. And then possibly, like I mentioned, when you have a system that does everything and then trying to separate that into 4 systems, trying to make sure that people understand what system is meant to do what and for what purpose and how that activity looks moving forward. And then, you also got to look at the infrastructure. So some of these systems, they take more data to do what they do moving forward. They take more power, more memory. The interfaces are a lot cleaner. They're not, there's maybe a lot more images or buttons that you have to consider that actually takes a bit more data. So you also have to make sure that you understand the infrastructure moving forward.
Your example earlier makes perfect sense there, right? Like, oh yeah, okay, you're going to move some modern system that's web-based. All right, well, there's an application server for the web. There's probably a data layer. There's all kinds of layers and different servers and things. And like the DOS-based machine is like one machine running on a PC somewhere.
With that, taking very little memory because it's just text.
Right.
Yeah. So that's another thing that needs to be looked into for sure. So
that, I mean, if that's kind of the planning picture, what does that translate to when you look at what people run into? It's kind of the obstacles that they hit, and maybe they're related to planning, maybe they're not, but what do you see people run up against when they're doing these kinds of retirements and transitions?
Yeah, so the most difficult obstacle to overcome typically that I have found is user resistance. So especially if you have a lot of
pesky users. I mean, people keep coming up over and over again in these conversations.
Users can't live with them, can't live without them.
I know.
Yeah, anybody that does this knows that user resistance it's a big deal.
It is.
Because you're always going to have that person that was the master of the system before that is definitely going to let you know they were the master before and try to direct you on what it needs to look like. And typically that's also the person that wants it to look exactly like it did before. And that becomes an issue. It becomes a little bit of a headache. But I found working around that typically I learned who that person is, because in this job you learn who that person is pretty quick, and you get them involved. You get them involved early, and you get them excited about what's potentially coming, how to make their life easier, and you focus on the things that is going to make their life easier. And I've had to do that with a lot of people. It's going to look this way, but when you find out the things they hate about their current system and you make those 100 times better and you explain that to them in detail on how that's going to be better, they typically get a little more excited about the process. And if you get them involved early and they feel like they're going to be the master of the new system too, that also helps. This can be handled in a few different ways, and if you don't talk to those people up front, you're just going to have a whole team that's falling apart because that person's always complaining immediately when the system gets released. So, the biggest critic can be your biggest supporter if you do it right.
Like you said, Julianne, change management, right?
Yeah.
People.
Right.
Yeah. So what else? What other obstacles?
Yeah. So you run into data migration. Again, the junk in, junk out problem is a big deal when it comes to that. So you want to make sure that your data migration is clean. Not only do you run into a problem with maybe the materials not being correct that you're trying to bring into your new system. This is the same thing for customer. If you're bringing over customers, the addresses around the world, especially if you're a global company, are a mess. There's everybody uses a zip code. Not really.
Not
so. Everybody's got an area code. It depends. Yeah.
Well, I struggle with that too. Everyone has an email address.
Yeah. Well, addresses are always numbers and words. No. So there's a lot of things you got to look at when it comes to different types of migration, and not only the data cleanliness, but also it's difficult to try to match up what a field is in the new system compared to what a field is in the old system. Make sure that's clean, make sure people understand what that's going to look like, and then writing the actual scripts to match that data. You can run into a ton of problems. You make one mistake on some type of transition form, all of a sudden your next field is all the data that you wanted in the previous field.
Right.
So there's several things. I mean, test migrations are a big deal. You always want to run test migrations. You don't want to just say, I got to do this once and be done with it. And because of that, you also need to make sure the migrations don't take a long time. So you want to make sure that those migrations happen in several hours as opposed to several days, because typically your data is down for that time frame. As soon as you try to start doing a migration, you want to lock your data. So the best thing to do is let's clean the previous system. Let's clean the data there, and then at some point click the transition button. Let's try to do it over a weekend, and let's come in on Monday and we'll have the new system. The data is up to date. We're not updating it over the weekend. If you are a weekend company, maybe you target the night. It's just there's going to be a specific time, upwards 12, 24 hours that you're going to have to shut down your system. So that can be a big deal. The other thing,
I just want to jump in. I just can envision this big untangling, especially around, moving this data around, getting it into the right fields and getting it to the right places. I mean, you mentioned about the 4 pillars, but something struck me as a possible obstacle is how often when you enter these situations, are the 4 pillars in place, or is it usually just 1 or 2 of them? Is it, how prepared are companies really for this?
Yeah, so it depends on the systems you're running into, right? So if you have a system, one of the first projects I did was they had a system for supply chain management. So that was their system. That was their supply system. They had all of their data on their materials and all of their stock. It's okay to be able to move that to an ERP system and a supply chain system and not have to have everything else around it. Just have the one system move, and then you can, now we want to update our customer management system. You do customers. You want to update your PLM system. So you can focus them in chunks if they're all separated. The problem I'm running into right now is that we have all these systems that are in one system. So this one system, there's 190 systems that I'm looking at for one area of business. And we're trying to figure out how to put those 190 systems into 4 systems. Each of those 190 systems exist because they each achieve a very specific task. You have 190 systems doing their very specific thing. And that means that it keeps track of stock. It keeps track of everything is put into one system. So when you're doing something like that, you have to try to look at developing all new systems. Fortunately, with the government, they're trying to modernize all the infrastructure at one time. So it's kind of a clean transition. They know they need to do these 4 things. And now it's trying to figure out how to align the production up so we don't run into an issue. So that's definitely a big issue. They don't typically have all 4 of them set up or planning to go to all 4 of them because it can be expensive. Each system comes with its own cost to migrate to. So in a lot of
And doing 4 at once, doing 4 at once is a big deal, right?
Yeah, in a lot of manufacturing companies, it's typically not a big deal. They typically have a old PDM, let's call it, is a product, just a document storage basically for all of their drawings and what have you. And if you're just dealing with a PDM going to a PLM, it's clean. There's typically not stock related to it, so you can just move your drawing database over, and then you can increase functionality and start bringing other things over if need be. So in a lot of manufacturing companies, it's typically clean, but not always. But you can find programs that this whole program needs to go in this software, and you can make that happen. So it depends. It's very oriented towards the customer. But in a lot of cases, it's a one-to-one match. So you're doing a PLM at one time, a CRM, and ERP. So that, I guess, is a good idea on that particular thing.
Are there other obstacles? I mean, I know you were mentioning a couple, and we got down that path about system transition, but are there other obstacles, or are those kind of the main ones, the users and the migrations and those sorts of things?
Yeah, so there's a few other things we run into. We run into license restrictions. Most of these new softwares, if you move to a PLM software and ERP software, you're going to have licenses, and you don't necessarily. If you're a big company, you have 1,000 people, you don't want a license for every person. Even if you're a company of 40 people, maybe you have the 10 shop guys, you really don't want them to have a license to your supply thing. They don't need to know that. They just need to, have a drawing and then manufacture it. So sometimes you need to consider the data that you're utilizing and who's utilizing the data, and determine if you need to develop some type of just a document viewer, basically, of data from one of the existing softwares. Which is possible to have access to a system's data without actually having access to the system, just for view-only purposes.
Sure.
And that happens a lot where people need a drawing database, let's say, is a big example, because you don't necessarily, everybody that views a drawing doesn't necessarily need to have access to modifying that drawing.
Right. But that reminds me of a related problem. Is this an issue? The security behind things, like when you are moving the systems, like what you're talking about now, you don't necessarily need access to everything.
Yeah, so security is always something that needs to be considered, because that system or wherever you're putting a document repository, you also want to make sure is somewhat secure and only people with certain accesses. So you do typically want to develop a login. A lot of these programs that I've been working on have roles. There's a million different types of roles that define what a user can see and access and modify.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that there's, for this product, I need view, edit. And what's your typically thing? View, edit, create, and obsolete basically is going to be your 4 kind of bigger roles. Sometimes you need an approver, I guess, is another thing that draw out there. But some of these systems now, I have this particular task does this particular thing, and this person needs read access to this specific thing for this specific thing for this specific thing. So their role is like 8 deep that basically describes what they do for this specific thing. And
on Tuesday.
Yeah. So that's understanding the roles that exist and trying to figure out how to clean that up is a big deal too. I mean, there's over between those 180 systems, there's roughly 2,000 different roles defined. So how do we go to 4 systems and reduce that definition is a big deal. Do I really need somebody that can write a particular activity, not be able to write these other 12 things? Can I control that kind of thing by metadata? If it's this thing, then don't let somebody with right access with this job title be able to do this, instead of trying to control everything by roles and making a mess of things. There's other ways to control it as opposed to just looking at roles and restrictions on those. So that can be a big deal when it comes to security. Also, you want your systems to talk to each other typically. So if you update, one of the problems I run into all the time is I updated this material. Well, this material is repeated 15 times in other systems. Well, now we have to go through those 15 systems and update that material because they don't talk to each other. When you go to a limited amount of systems, or even in a logic base, if you update that thing once, you want to update it everywhere. So integrating the systems so they talk to each other is also kind of a big deal when it comes to that, because you want to make sure that they talk to each other, they're clean, and the data that you update in one place is updated in all places, so you don't end up with useless data the minute that you migrate it, essentially, or pull it over or look at it. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine integration is it's something that we hear a lot about, and on many of the conversations we've been having on the podcast around digital engineering. One of the things you're saying about role restrictions and all the complications and the hierarchies you have to navigate to try to understand who does what and who's responsible for what and who approves what. Let's talk a little bit more about those people considerations, because how do those decisions even get made? There isn't just one person. I imagine you're working with many people to help, figure out the new process with the new system. And I'm not sure how it works. You're the one who can help me understand that. But what other things do we need to think about, or what considerations do people need to make when it comes to the people side of this equation for the system retirements?
Yeah. So one of the big deals is trying to get people to understand the new system. Now they might have had, Joe Schmo tell them exactly and sit over their shoulder and walk them through the old process and say, this, you need to click on this, and then you need to click on this. Just something they're going to have to remember for the rest of their job there. But typically you want them to have some type of training documents. You want them to be trained in the functionality, but you also want them to have something they can refer to. So they're not constantly asking questions. You're not constantly bogging people down. A lot of these systems have training integrate the new systems. Older systems, it's hit and miss, but a lot of the newer systems have training integrated menus. So you can create your own training instructions. You can upload it to the training menu. The problem with PLM, ERP, CRM, even they're all kind of like Excel. You get a blank workbook. It's all pretty, but there's all these things you got to do to it to make it work for what you need it to work for. There's all this cool functionality. Your company's going to use 10% of it. Let's get you focused on that 10% of it. I don't need to give you training instructions on how to use Excel. I need to give you training instructions on how to use that 10%. So we want to make sure. Yeah, we want to make sure that you got access to that 10% of stuff. How to use that 10%, especially since you have specific fields for your company. There's customization, but we try to stick away from customization because customization makes upgrading difficult. But one thing we can do is we can add fields, remove fields. That's all relatively easy in these programs, is to just generate additional data. That's not customizing the program. That's just adding data you can put in. But want your training instructions to be focused on that. I don't know how many times people have gone into a training instruction and have seen useless fields that make no sense for their company that doesn't match what they're doing. So you want to definitely have training specific for what you're doing. And it's easily accessible, preferably through the program. So that's a big deal. You want to understand how to use the migrated data. So there's going to be a difference between new data and migrated data. Typically, you have some kind of notes saying that data is migrated. So you understand that a lot of times especially when you first migrate, you want to try to ensure that stuff is being checked as it's being utilized too. So you have typically markers or something that you can denote that this has been checked. So it can be used without even usually considering it outside of making sure you selected the right material. So how to use the migrated data compared to the data that you're creating is going to be a couple different processes. Need to understand, and the people need to understand, that there's going to be reduced productivity while people are coming up to speed on the new system. It's not going to exist forever. Typically, you created these and went to these systems because you're going to have increased productivity, and it's going to work great. But you have the transition period that's going to have, you're going to need support. You're going to have issues. You're going to run into things, maybe migrated data that didn't come over quite the way you wanted it to, that you're going to need to correct. And then you're going to have a whole crew of people that are learning how to use the new system, which is going to take some time, and it does reduce the productivity for a little bit. I wouldn't say a long time. People, especially most of these systems are directed towards, I want to call them the tech generation, the people that have just been around technology their whole life. So a lot of these systems have gone to gone to people being able to use them easier. I don't know if anybody else was annoyed in the early 2000s when Excel decided to change their whole layout and they went to all these tiles. But that's basically the way
I do remember that.
That's
And Microsoft did the ribbons. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, that's basically the way most of these systems run, is on ribbons, and all of the technology has moved to being utilized basically a similar way now. So it makes user adaptation a little quicker and a little cleaner. You also want to ensure that people are brought in early on the discussion. This came back to having the people resistance. So if you bring people in early, you want to make sure that they are involved and that the system that they're going to get in the end is something that they can appreciate, utilize, and understand why they're doing it. Is a big deal. And being able to explain what's in it for the people that are using the system, why they're using it, what is beneficial, why did they have to go to this, how is it benefiting me. Also helping them understand how it's most cases, how it's benefiting people downfield. Why is this better for everybody else involved instead of just, your particular role? How is your particular role now benefiting the whole company as opposed to just your little space? So there's
it's like
big...
it's like that power user you brought up a minute ago, right? When you were saying, look, that person is maybe going to be your biggest resistance, but if you can get them on your team, maybe the biggest help. But you can't forget that. That's kind of your point there about what's in it for them. Why should they give up this, role of master of the old system?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a problem when you're dealing with 190 systems trying to go to the 4 systems, because you don't need 190 master users. But you need those 190 people to understand that there is, there is a benefit for them moving forward. There is something that they will be able to adopt. We will still need power users. We're still going to need support teams. We're going to need people, most companies try to keep support localized. They don't want to always have to go to somebody to answer a question. So, trying to help them become that person. You will be the person, or you can be the person, as long as you try to pull the adaptation of this and understand and want to learn. We'll teach you. And that's kind of a big deal as well.
So I think, all those things you just mentioned related to people, I would consider sort of indirect advice, but I want to come to that advice point. You've seen a lot of this, right? I mean, like you said, you're living the 180 to 4 now, but even outside of that, you've done these kinds of things in the past. From all that experience, what advice would you give to somebody who's planning some kind of digital engineering system transition, right? And they think they're going to have to retire something or, close something down. What would you tell them? Hey, these are the couple things you need to make sure you think about.
Well, the big thing is the data cleanliness. That was a big thing. You understand, and a lot of people that, especially if they've been using a system for 40, 50 years, there's that one material they tell people, let's not use that one. But instead of removing it because it's used on other things, it stays there, and it just becomes cluttered data. So it's a big deal to consider that when you're looking at this. I mean, even a company that's been around 10 years is going to have some of that junk in their system typically. So you want to make sure you're regularly trying to clean that up. So data cleanliness is a big deal when it comes to that. You want to bring people into the fold. You want to have open communication. You're going to end up with disgruntled people. There's no way to go about it, but you want to make sure that maybe at least their supervisors or managers or people of that they can go to if they want to say something. They can actually communicate, and they can work through some of those issues internally. And you want to get them supported. Being on the front end of this and seeing these data migrations and being part of many of them, and being the guy that heard a lot of these complaints up front when I worked at Atlas Copco. I heard a lot of the complaints, and the last thing I liked hearing was people going and saying, "Oh, well, it's just what we have to do. We have to go to this system." And you don't want people to be in that mindset, because you're going to have a customer base that doesn't want to use your system. So you want the encouragement to be, "Oh, we're doing this because we want this kind of functionality out of it." When it comes to any kind of company, you don't want to say, "Oh, the corporation's telling us we have to do it." So that was a big deal, is bringing people into the fold, getting people excited about the system, telling them why we're doing it, and then allowing them to disperse that information. So when they get a question, they're saying, oh, well, but it's going to be well integrated in the future, so we don't have to, just type in a random search bar and then dig through 150 materials to try to find the one that we need to use. Now we can just type in these 2 pieces of data and it'll pop it up. It's great. We want to find a drawing. We don't now have to dig through, 100,000 folders on a desktop to try to find the one drawing that we need. Now we can just type in this data in a search field and it'll give it to us. There's a lot of people that use server folders for their PDM, their drawing management system. It's just a folder on their desktop that they go to, and it goes to a server. And these things take forever to load. You click on it, and then even if you type in a search, it's going to be searching for 15 minutes because there's 100,000 drawings it's trying to search for. Where if you're in an integrated PLM system or something, you just type in a data field, and it's like, I'm looking for this data here, and it finds it pretty quickly. So typically you can run into a better use of your data when it comes to that kind of stuff. And that's not just PDM specific. That's also ERP specific, and it kind of rolls throughout the different systems. One of the issues I'm running into right now is everybody's got their Access database. I got Access, and I created this Access database. And you ask the question, well, how long does that take you to do something in the morning? And it's like, oh, well, it takes us 8 hours to build the database every morning. But once it's built, we can search through it. And it's like, come on. We started at midnight, and then when the people come in at 8 o'clock, we can do work. And it's like, there's got to be a better way. What if this data is always automatically updating, and you don't need to pull it from 12 systems to build your Access database? It's just, hey, it's automatically updated. You updated it once, you click on the system, and you see the data. Almost in real time, essentially. I received something, the system knows I received it. It transfers the data to my ERP system that says, hey, you can now work on this thing, and you start working on it. As opposed to, oh, I need to update my Access database. Now my Access database tells me that the material's there, and now I can create a traveler, but now I need to go to this system. Now I need to update my Access database so it knows the traveler exists now. So it can be overbearing when it comes to things along those lines.
You'd think that would be the big aha moment for somebody. It's like, oh, I don't have to wait for that Access database to build anymore.
I can tell you how many people I got excited with that example. So, yeah, it's like, hey, can you imagine a day when you just go to your system that you want to build your work traveler in or find your workload, and everything's already in there up to date as the material came in? You're like, oh my God, that would be great. How do you do that?
That's nirvana. Yes.
Yes. Well, there's a problem you run into, especially, it's a special use case when you deal with the military and you deal with the government, because turnover. They have new employees every 4 years. They got a whole basically new set of employees. So you're dealing with most of the time between 18 and 25-year-olds roughly. Those kids don't know what DOS is. They haven't never dealt with DOS. They've not really typically dealt with Access. Their job was to come in here. I'm hoping to click a few buttons and be able to do what I'm doing. No, you got to now train somebody for 6 months on how to utilize your system in their 4-year time frame. That's a big chunk of their time frame working for you. So you don't want to take up an eighth of somebody's career just teaching them how to use the stuff. So
teaching them how to work a computer without a mouse.
So, well, it strikes me that you mentioned data cleanliness as being a big part of the project, but that's something that you can kind of contain into a group of people that you're trying to work with. But when you get to the whole training and the people side of this, it just seems that I just wonder how fully prepared our companies or government organizations, since that's who you're working with, really. Are they doing that well? Are they taking that piece of the project more seriously? Because I know on the commercial side, sometimes it's not as focused. So, that's why we have partners like SharePLM to help people through some of these processes. But
yeah, I mean, again, you have turnover every 4 years, and I've been working on some of these projects for almost 4 years. So when you're talking about the people you deal with, there's very few people over the 4 years that I've continuously dealt with. You got new people bringing in the fold, and then you got people that are coming on, and they got the belief that this thing is coming, and then all of a sudden it doesn't come by the time their service is done, and it's like, oh well, shoot. And then I don't know. I compare it to my high school when I graduated. They're like, oh, we're going to get a swimming pool. and a new football field. And then you graduate, and 2 years later, they got a swimming pool and a football field. They're like, well, crap, why didn't that happen while I was there? So, so there's that kind of dynamic you run into where you're happy that it's there, but at the same time, you would have been way more enjoyed to have used those things. Yeah. So that's
indeed. Well, this has been a great conversation, Mark, but I have to kind of reel us in. We're getting close to our time, actually a little over time, but this was a great conversation. You really made some important points and structured this conversation. So I think some people who are going to be experiencing this would have some good takeaways. But with that, I wonder if Jonathan has some good takeaways for us today.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to summarize a lot of the stuff that Mark brought up and things that we talked through. And I think it hit on so many good areas about when you need to retire a system, what are you thinking about? So let me try and sort of group them, I think, by some of the discussion. There are lots of reasons why you might need to do it in the first place, right? There's end of life is kind of an obvious one, and maybe compliance related to that. There's functionality, new things that you need, or outdated technology you got to deal with. And you mentioned one, as we got later in the conversation, about just needing to reach a new audience. Right? I mean, there are people who just can't be reached by some of these old tools, and it's going to be a struggle to use them. But when you go to do it, there's a lot to consider. You have to think about that functionality mapping, right? You mentioned like the 180 down to 4. What I used to do here, where am I going to do it now? And, how does that transition look? But the data, too, making sure they get the data they need. You probably have to think about different infrastructure, especially depending on how old the tools are. And mostly, don't forget users. You got to consider the users. Now, we also talked a little bit about obstacles, right? And some of those things that we just mentioned that you have to consider can be those obstacles, the people, the data, things like that. But then you added a few others, licensing, security, integration, things that you want to pay attention to make sure they don't get in the way of maybe people adopting and being able to use it. And then I think we talked for a minute about some of those people-specific issues, because like you said, Julianne, we see this a lot. I think I was very curious to hear what Mark sees, in this retirement-specific area. But I think the same themes came up. Training, support, communications, motivation, like all the things you have to think about that you might stumble on, that are going to make people, less productive, basically, all those things. So you got to address all those. And then I think we wrapped up with advice, right? And a lot of that advice keyed in on some of the people things. But Mark, you also mentioned several times, data cleanliness. Make sure you got good data coming over, not the, junk in, junk out situation. Another one that I really like that you mentioned, embrace the negative. The negative's going to be there, but just embrace it, communicate, talk about it, get it addressed, try and turn those folks around. And then the last one that I was hearing, and hopefully I was hearing this right, is you're really pointing out you need to have an openness to change. Maybe some of that embracing the negative is getting people to help be open to, hey, a different way might be better, right? That access traveler example is a great one. If they understand where you're going, then suddenly it's like, oh, all right, sure. The new way sounds great if it's going to get me the results I want. So that's what I took out of the conversation. But what did I miss, Mark? Was there anything in there that we talked about that we really should highlight or that I didn't touch on with that summary?
No, it's a pretty good summary. Again, that open to change is a big deal, and negative communication is okay. Anybody that's in this process we're not stingy people. If you have something that needs to happen, and we can find a good compromise to make that happen without customizing a system that is what the request was, then we're gonna try to make that happen. So there is also compromising that we can do with some of these systems to make your life a little easier, or kind of adhere to your problems. We don't have a question or an answer to your negativity or your complaint. Then we'll find one. There is an answer to everything that you think is going to be a problem moving forward, and we'll help you understand that, and we'll help you to look forward to how this is going to look in the future, and why that's such a good thing to be focused on. But
that's a good reminder.
Your summary was pretty good, Jonathan. That was caught pretty much most of the points.
Cool.
Yeah, the only other thing I heard that, I'm pivoting off of what you were just talking about, Mark, was, getting creative with solutions, but not necessarily customizing is, maybe integration is a way to help do that, right? So getting data around and making it a little bit more easier to access so people can get what they need, right? So, Well, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark. We really glad to have you here with us.
Absolutely. It's been a great conversation, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, your first time on the podcast, you did great. It was awesome. Well, with that, everybody, we want to thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you have any questions for Mark, please make sure to put a comment or a question on our post on social media. We'd love to have that conversation further. If you want to send us an email and you want to further have deeper discussions, podcast@razorleaf.com. That's where we found. And with that, we appreciate your time today, and make sure to tune in to Stay Sharp with future episodes. And until next time, everybody, stay sharp.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you like this podcast, please be sure to hit that like button. We would really appreciate that. And as always, subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or check us out on YouTube. If you have any questions, please leave us a comment on this post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We'd love to hear from you, and Mark is always available to answer questions about how to retire systems and the plan to do that. Until next time, everybody, stay sharp.